Yo, what's up guys, Alf here, and today I'm going to be doing a full in-depth deck breakdown of a deck that I've recently used to get top 25 with on the arena ladder. Now before I get into it, there's going to be an MTG zone link down in the description. If you click on that, it'll have the deck list there that you can just import into arena if you want to try the deck out for yourself. And I'm also in the process of writing a full text article about this deck that will have more details, a full sideboard guide, how I would change the deck for best of one, and some additional tips and tricks there as well. So once that's finished and up, I'll link that down in the description as well if you're interested. So anyway, with that all out of the way, this is my Jeskai control deck in Historic. Now recently I've been playing a lot of control in the format and been trying out a lot of different shells for control, and this has definitely felt like the best one to me so far. So if you're not familiar with control or you've not played it in Historic, the general game plan is you're a late game deck, so you're trying to interact with the opponent in the first few turns of the game, stabilise against their game plan using creature removal and counter spells, and then run away with the game with your win conditions, which in this particular deck are Teferi and Siphoner, especially in conjunction with Ephemerate. So we'll start off by having a look at the win conditions, and then we'll have a look at the interaction afterwards. So first of all, we've got 4 copies of Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. So if you've played Historic or you've played against Control in Historic, you'll be familiar with this card. It's been a mainstay in Control decks basically since the format started. So it's a 5 mana Planeswalker, enters with 4 loyalty, and the +1, we draw a card, and then at the beginning of the next end step we untap 2 lands. So even though Teferi is a 5 mana Planeswalker, since this deck is packed with cheap instant speed interaction, it often feels like a 3 mana Planeswalker, because if we play this on turn 5, we +1 to draw a card and then untap, we can then utilise that mana during the opponent's turn to interact with the opponent using stuff like Lightning Helix or Sensor, for example. If we play it on turn 6, we can also then untap with Archmage's Charm as a counter spell as well. So the +1 on this is just great at running away with the game and also ensuring that we always have mana up to protect a Teferi during the opponent's turn, which is really important. Then the -3, we can put any non-land permanent in the opponent's library third from top. So this is just great as a temporary solution to any problematic permanent the opponent has, whether that's a big creature or a non-creature permanent like an opposing Planeswalker or an artifact or enchantment, for example. So the flexibility on this is great at just ensuring we always have a way to deal with whatever sticky threats the opponent has. And then the -8, the ultimate, will basically always win you the game when we get to it. You can just exile any permanent the opponent has, including their lands. And one of the nice things about Teferi is that it can act as a win condition in and of itself. So if you get to the ultimate, you will eventually get to a point where you just exile all the opponent's permanents. And even if you had no other win conditions in the deck, you can still win by using Teferi's -3 on itself to make sure that you don't deck out. You can keep putting Teferi back in your deck, and then the opponent will deck out first. Thankfully in this deck we have Cyber Siphoner, and Lightning Helix as well, I guess, can work if the opponent's at a low life total. And thankfully if Cyber Siphoner would die, it gets shuffled back in our library. So using Teferi as a win condition in and of itself very rarely comes up, because we usually have Siphoner to close the game out. But if you are in a situation where they exile all your Siphoners, for example, it's worth bearing that in mind. So like I said, the other win condition in the deck is Cyber Siphoner. So this is a 4 mana 2/2 with flash, and when it enters the battlefield we get to return an instant or sorcery from our graveyard to our hand. And like I said, if it would die, it shuffles itself back into the library, which is great because we can just keep reusing it over and over again, and we're very unlikely to not have a win condition alongside Teferi because of that. Additionally, it costs 2 less to cast if there are no instances or sorceries in our hand. Casting this for 2 mana is insane, it's such a good rate. Unfortunately, because we do have a lot of instances and sorceries in the deck, we very rarely do get to cast this for 2 mana, but even at 4 mana it's a really good rate. Specifically when you do get to, in the situations where you do get to cast it for 2 mana, it's very important that you know when to set stops, because if you draw a card, say you have no instants or sorceries in your hand, if you draw a card for turn, for example, and it's an instant or sorcery, it will go back to casting 4. So one situation with Cyber Siphoner where you need to know to set a stop during your upkeep is, say for example you have a Siphoner and another instant or sorcery in your hand, and at the end of the opponent's turn you're tapping out to cast that instant or sorcery. It's definitely worth setting a stop during your upkeep, so once you untap you can flash in Siphoner for 2 mana before you draw your card for turn, because if you don't set a stop it will just skip straight through to your draw step, and if you draw an instant or sorcery for your turn, Cyber Siphoner will go from 2 mana back up to 4, which might mean then you can't cast the instant or sorcery you get back. So it's definitely worth remembering to set a stop during your upkeep. Additionally, there are some other tricks you can do where you can go into full control. So say for example you have Siphoner plus Archmage's Charm and 5 mana, and you want to use the Archmage's Charm to draw 2 cards. If you go into full control mode, you can cast the Archmage's Charm, targeting yourself to draw 2, and with the Archmage's Charm on the stack, we can then cast Siphoner for 2 mana because Archmage's Charm is no longer in our hand, and get an instant or sorcery back from the graveyard. Because if you wait to draw 2, if you draw another instant or sorcery, then Siphoner goes back up to 4. So it's always worth remembering to set stops with Siphoner to give yourself the opportunity to cast it for 2 mana, so you then have additional mana to cast the instants or sorcery. So that's something to bear in mind when you're playing this card. So even at a base rate, Siphoner is pretty good at, you know, flashing it in to potentially trade off with creatures in combat, as well as getting back whatever the best card in our graveyard is. But the really broken thing with Siphoner is you can pair it with Ephemerate in this deck. So the way Siphoner plus Ephemerate works is you basically get an additional card, or you get the best card from your graveyard back to your hand every single turn if you set this loop up. So the way it works is, say you have a Siphoner in play and you have an Ephemerate in hand, and it's the opponent's end step, for example, you can cast Ephemerate targeting the Siphoner, which will blink it. Siphoner will re-enter the battlefield, which gets it a trigger from the Siphoner. You get the best instant or sorcery from your graveyard back to your hand, and at the beginning of your next turn, you get the rebound, which then means that you get to cast Ephemerate again. You can blink the Siphoner with the rebound off Ephemerate, and by the time Siphoner enters the battlefield, the Ephemerate has gone back to the graveyard, so you can use the Siphoner to get Ephemerate back to your hand again, and just repeatedly do that loop over and over again. So setting up Siphoner plus Ephemerate is usually going to be good enough to close out the game, because you basically get the best instant or sorcery from your graveyard back to your hand every single turn. So for example, we could just keep looping Archmage's Charm to make sure we have a counterspell every turn. We can keep looping Divine Purge to make sure we have a sweeper every turn. So this is arguably a better late game than Teferi, because Teferi draws you a random card from your deck every turn, whereas Siphoner plus Ephemerate gets you the best instant or sorcery back from your graveyard every turn. So you get really good card choice, and there are so many decks that just can't beat this loop. Now obviously one of the weaknesses of this is it is reliant on graveyard hate, but one of the reasons I really like Siphoner alongside Teferi is that Teferi doesn't care about graveyard hate at all, and neither does the rest of our deck at all. So if the opponent does board in graveyard hate against you, it only stops Siphoner and Ephemerate. The rest of your deck doesn't really care about it. And additionally, we do have March of Otherworldly Light that can deal with basically any graveyard hate anyway. So if we do happen to have Siphoner and the opponent has a Rest in Peace or something, we can just use March to get rid of it and then get our graveyard back online again. Now obviously the big weakness of running Ephemerate with only Siphoner as a target is Ephemerate will be dead when we don't have Siphoner, which can be annoying, but I think having Siphoner Ephemerate as another late game engine that's even more potentially powerful than Teferi is worth it. And once we do have Ephemerate in our hand, as soon as we get Siphoner, we just have such a good endgame lock set up as well. Now I did test some other cards with Enter the Battlefield triggers so that we have more redundancy for Ephemerate. The first of this was Torrential Gearhulk, because that's a card that is kind of commonly played in Control anyway. But the problems with Torrential Gearhulk is 6 mana is just way too expensive. You know, at least with Teferi, 5 mana has felt quite expensive for Teferi against certain decks, but at least you get 2 mana back immediately, whereas getting to 6 mana with Gearhulk when we're not running any ways to ramp into it like the treasure producers that a lot of the old Jeskai builds are running, just felt too expensive. And the other big problem with Gearhulk as well is that it makes the deck too reliant on graveyard hate. If your top end was Siphoner and Gearhulk, then you just get shut off by any graveyard hate like Rest in Peace. So Gearhulk didn't really feel worth it. The other card I tested, because I thought it would be potentially good, was Wandering Mind. So this is basically a Narset activation on a creature. So when this enters, we look at the top 6 and put a non-creature in our hand, and then that's obviously great with Ephemerate as well. But I felt like at that point you're kind of deviating from the Control game plan, having to tap out on turn 3 where you really want to be holding mana up for Archmage's Charm and interaction like Helix. Just felt like it wasn't worth it. And you know, there are a lot of plays in this format where you need to have counter spells, so tapping out for this at any point in the game is pretty risky. And one of the big draws to running Siphoner is it allows you to play draw go and constantly have stuff up during your turn, so having to tap out for a creature just didn't really feel like it was working within the general game plan of the deck. And for that reason, that's why I'm also not running stuff like Skyclave Apparition or Spirited Companion, which are other cards that are great with Ephemerate, but if you're running cards like that, at that point you're running much more of a mid-range deck than Control. So having Ephemerate as a dead card when you don't have Siphoner, like I said, it can be a bit annoying, but we have a lot of ways to dig through the deck, a lot of card draws, and once you do have Siphoner plus Ephemerate, I feel like it's such a strong late game that it's worth having a 2-of in the deck that is potentially dead when you don't have other pieces. So those are the main top end of the deck. Now we'll have a look at the interaction that we've got. So starting off with 4 copies of March of Otherworldly Light. So this is incredibly versatile removal. It can kill any creature, artifact or enchantment. Now obviously you do have to pay a decent amount of mana. You know, you have to pay 1 plus whatever the mana value of the card is. But a lot of the time in the early game, you know, you can use this to take out creatures. The fact that you can exile other cards to trade card advantage for tempo is very important against a lot of the early to kill creatures as well. But the fact that this can just kill anything solves a lot of problems that the control decks had previously, where it wouldn't be able to deal with sticky threats like Witch's Oven, Search for Counter. The fact that this can kill any artifact or enchantment as well as creature is really powerful. And additionally, the really nice thing about this is that we can kill both tokens and creature lands just for 1 mana. So tokens is especially important in the mirror match at taking out stuff like shark tokens, which control decks have always struggled with in the past, as well as being able to take out any other tokens they make. But the fact that this can take out creature lands for 1 mana is huge as well, because creature lands are very popular because of the mono-coloured lands that came out with the D&D set. And typically, control does struggle against creature lands, so the fact that we can just take any of them out for 1 mana is great. And the fact that this can just work as versatile removal in the late game. You know, once you have a lot of mana available, you can use this to take out bigger creatures that a lot of your other removal might not be able to take out. So March is just great, versatile removal, also great at being able to deal with Graveyard Hate to get Siphoner back online with as well. And then I've got 4 copies of Censor, so I am running Archmage's Charm as the main counter spell, but I felt like I wanted some additional counter magic in the deck as well. And Censor is great at just being a way to stymie the opponent's early game, punish them for playing on curve, and the fact that we can cycle this away once the opponent has access to more mana is really good as well. It's also really nice at just making sure that we hit land drops. I'm running 26 lands, which I feel like is a decent enough number for a control deck, but missing land drops in control is really punishing, and having Censor as a way to just dig for additional lands in the early game is really important as well. Then we've got 4 copies of Expressive Iteration. So this is one of the main reasons that we're running red in the deck, and Iteration is a super powerful card. Probably the best card advantage spell in the whole format. You know, in a lot of situations, this is a 2 mana which to draw 2, but you also get really good card selection as well. So this is great at ensuring we keep hitting land drops, and then once we have enough lands, we can just use this to get 2 spells. So Iteration is just great at digging for what we need and just providing extra card advantage. One of the big reasons I'm also really high on Iteration right now is because one of the worst matchups for control in the format is Rakdos Arcanist, because they're so effective at discarding your hand. Now, from my experience, the way that you beat Arcanist from the control side is just by top decking well. The big weakness of the Arcanist deck is that they're not very good if the opponent top decks a good card to get them back into the game. They're very good at discarding cards, but if the opponent rips a Teferi in the control matchup, for example, there's not really much they can do about that. So having a high density of cards in the deck that can suddenly just get you straight back into a game is really important. And having Iteration alongside Teferi as just a card that can just suddenly get you back into the game really helps to shore up that matchup. Then we've got 4 copies of Lightning Helix, so this is another big reason to be running red in the deck. Now, Iteration is a powerful enough card that on its own, I think that could justify running red in the deck. But Helix is actually potentially more important because it solves a lot of problems that the blue-white version had that I tested of this deck. So I did test a just pure blue-white version, and there is a real appeal for just being more streamlined and not splashing the 3rd colour. First of all, your mana base is more consistent and less painful. You also get to run utility lands. As you can see, we're not running any utility lands in the mana base because I wanted it to be as consistent as possible. But I found that the big problem with blue-white was that it didn't have that good early single target removal. And I felt like that's really important in this deck. First of all, because we have a lot of top end. We've got Siphoner and Teferi. Ephemerate also kind of works as top end because it doesn't really do anything until we have the Siphoner. So I felt like it was really important to have a lot of early game interaction. First of all, to help us stabilize and get to those late games, but also just because we want to make sure that we always have a good target to get back with Siphoner on turn 4. It's kind of annoying to be in a situation where it gets to the end of the opponent's turn 4 and you want to flash and Siphoner but you don't have something in the graveyard. So I wanted to make sure that I have early interaction to get to the late game, but also make sure that I have early instants and sorceries to get in the graveyard so that we can consistently flash in Siphoner on turn 4 to get value off it. So Helix is great at that, you know, providing that sort of early game interaction against creatures. In the blue-white deck, the only real option you've got at filling this slot is Fateful Absence, which is a fine card in control, and I think it would be fine as a 2 of, but relying on it as like a 4 of as your main early game interaction is really problematic because the clues it gives really add up. It allows the opponent to get straight back into the game. There are so many cards in the format that do get, you know, these aggro mid-range decks back into the game. So giving the opponent repeated clues off your 4 of Fateful Absence just felt really bad. And not having access to main deck life game was also a real problem because there are a lot of decks in the format that have good reach in the late game right now. Cat Oven decks can drain you out. You know, there's Blitz decks that are running burn spells. Decks that are running haste creatures like Phoenix can hit you for a bunch of damage out of nowhere. So not having a way to gain life is really problematic, and Helix really helps to solve all of those problems. And it's also really nice to get back with Siphoner against the aggro decks as well. If you can start looping Helix with Siphoner just as a way to interact with their creatures and put your life total out of range of their reach is so important as well. So Helix is a really important card in the deck for those reasons. And if we look at the 3-drop slot, we've got 4 copies of Divine Purge. So this is my main sweeper of choice in the deck, and this is really solid against the vast majority of creature decks in the format. It's very important against the Sacrifice decks. I think the main reason why Sacrifice is favoured in that matchup is because of Divine Purge. I think in general, even without Purge, Control is probably the overall favourite in that matchup, but it gets a lot closer. I feel like Divine Purge is the real card that helps push that matchup really heavily in Control's favour, so I wanted to max out on it just to make sure that we're a real favourite in that matchup. But even outside of that, other than Phoenix, all of the other creature decks in the format get really punished by this. You know, humans, Merfolk, even a deck like Auras that relies on creatures to win is really important. The other big reason why I really like Divine Purge in this particular deck is because you can loop it with Cyber Siphoner. So all of the other Wraths that you can run, or all of the other commonly played Wraths like Wrath of God and Day of Judgment, don't really work super well with Cyber Siphoner because you can get it back with the Siphoner, but then if you cast the Wrath it also kills your Siphoner, whereas since Siphoner's 4 mana it doesn't get hit by Divine Purge at all, so you can set up loops with Cyber Siphoner and Ephemerate where you get Divine Purge back every turn, and you can just sweep the opponent's board over and over again. And like I said, there are a number of creature decks without haste, like Auras and Humans and Merfolk and Shamans for example, where they can't beat Divine Purge every turn because they don't have any haste creatures. So setting up Ephemerate plus Cyber Siphoner with Divine Purge is just a way to guarantee that you're going to win in those matches. And in general, outside of Phoenix, it just deals with all of the aggro decks in the format as well. It is a bit of a problem that this is pretty weak against Phoenix. We do have a fairly bad game 1 against Phoenix in general, and having Divine Purge as our main sweeper is problematic, but we do have some other good cards. You know, looping Helix against Phoenix can be good enough to win game 1, and we do have a lot of cards in the sideboard, so our main game plan against Phoenix is to just become really strong post sideboard, and Divine Purge just means that we're very strong against the rest of the format. Then we've got 4 copies of Archmage's Charm, so this is probably the most powerful interaction that Control runs at the moment. So you've got 3 modes. Counter target spell, just unconditional counter spell is really important in this deck. Being able to loop this with Cyber Siphoner and Ephemerate is great at just ensuring we have a hard counter for whatever the opponent has every turn. The ability to draw 2 cards is really important, and making sure that we keep hitting land drops, helping us dig for stuff if we need, and just making sure that we can dig for our late game stuff. If we're at parity, we can just use the draw tool on this to try and hit a Siphoner or Teferi and start running away with the game. And then the ability to take control of a non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less is really important. You can take some really important creatures with this, like Dragon's Rage Channeler and Esper Sentinel for example. You can take control of tokens as well, which is really important in the mirror match at taking control of Shark tokens. But also don't forget that you can take non-creature permanents as well. So against the Sacrifice deck, for example, you can also take Witch's Oven to break up their Cat Oven loops. So Archmage's Charm, super flexible card, and one of the best cards that you can constantly get back with Cyber Siphoner and Ephemerate as well. Then obviously I've talked about Siphoner and Teferi as well. In terms of the mana base, 26 lands has felt like a good amount. I could see going up to 27 because, you know, hitting land drops in Control is really important, but since we have a lot of early ways to draw in Censor, Iteration and Archmage's Charm, 26 has felt like a good amount. In terms of the actual lands themselves, 4 Ralgrim Triumph is huge at giving you cycling to make sure that you have some way to mitigate against Flood, which is really important. 1 basic island is also important, and making sure that you don't get blown out by stuff like Field of Ruin. And then the rest of the deck is all dual lands, which might seem a bit weird because, you know, stuff like Hall of Storm Giants is really important for Control decks in general, but this deck has a lot of very stringent mana constraints. You know, we need double white for Divine Purge on turn 3, which is really important to have on curve against a lot of decks. We need red and white on turn 2 for Helix. We need blue and red on turn 2 for Iteration. So I felt like it was much more important to just guarantee that we have the mana that we need. And I also wanted to make sure that we guaranteed have triple blue on turn 3 for Archmage's Charm as well. I did play versions of this deck in the past where I was running a single copy of Sacred Foundry just to ensure that we had enough red and white. But I would occasionally, you know, once every 20 or 30 matches, run into a situation where I can't cast Archmage's Charm on turn 3 because I had the Sacred Foundry. So I've just played it safe and just gone for all blue dual lands just to make sure that we have it. And it's felt good so far. You know, missing Hall of Storm Giants is a bit problematic, but I think having Hall of Storm Giants in games where we need Helix or Iteration on turn 2 can cause problems, so I've been really liking it so far. So that's the main deck. I've been really impressed with it, and I think having Teferi plus Siphoner and Ephemerate just gives you such a strong late game against so many decks. Now onto the sideboard. So first of all, we've got Graveyard Hate. We've got 3 copies of Soul Guide Lantern and 1 copy of Unlicensed Hearse. So this is really important at the moment, especially for the Phoenix deck. Like I said, that's a tough matchup game 1, especially because we're maxing out on Divine Purge in the main deck. So having ways to shut off Delirium and Phoenix against the Phoenix decks is really important. Additionally, Rakdos Arcanist is another bad matchup, and it's important to have Graveyard Hate there. It's shutting off both Arcanist and Croxer. So having 4 copies of Graveyard Hate in the sideboard is really important. 1 copy of Unlicensed Hearse. I think this is better than Soul Guide Lantern as the first copy, because it constantly exiles cards from the graveyard. You know, the one weakness of Soul Guide Lantern is its single use. So if the opponent forces you to crack it, you know, say they're going to get Phoenixes back, or say they're trying to cast a Thoughtseize with Arcanist, they can force you to crack it and then get their graveyard back online. Whereas on Unlicensed Hearse, you can just repeatedly exile, and I feel like 2 cards a turn is good enough that you can constantly shut off what the opponent's trying to do. The one weakness of Hearse, though, is that it's pretty bad in multiples, which is why I'm only running 1 copy of it. Now, Unlicensed Hearse, not a card you'd commonly see in Control, but thankfully, because we have Cyber Siphoner, we do have a way to crew it, which is nice. Since Unlicensed Hearse is bad in multiples, that's the reason why I'm running 3 copies of Soul Guide Lantern as the additional 3 extra bits of Graveyard Hate, because we can cycle this away if we draw it in multiples. But like I said, Graveyard Hate very important as well. Greasefang is still a deck in the format, so I feel like it's important having a high density of Graveyard Hate so that you're pretty likely to hit it. Then we've got 4 copies of Rekindling Phoenix. So this is a tech of mine, and I've been really liking it. So the real advantage of Rekindling Phoenix, especially if you're playing closed deck lists, like if you're playing just on ladder, is that most opponents are going to be boarding out their creature removal against you. You know, some people might keep it in because they see Siphoner, but in general, most decks are going to be trimming on their creature removal, and Rekindling Phoenix is a really big way to take advantage of that, because it requires 2 removal spells or removal plus Graveyard Hate in order to interact with. This is particularly good against a deck like Phoenix, because we can just block all of their creatures with this. Even Crackling Drake we can trade with, and then they need removal on top of that to be able to take it out permanently. I also feel like it's good against the Arcanist deck at being able to pressure their Planeswalkers like Chandra and Sorin, as well as them not being able to attack in with stuff like War Boss and Graveyard Trespasser as well. And it can be good against the food decks as well, because they're not going to have that much creature removal in, and we can just use this to either block a big Ravenous Squirrel every turn or actually start pressuring in the air. So I feel like Rekindling Phoenix is really good when you're playing closed deck lists. If you're playing open deck lists, it might be a bit risky, but even then, the opponent's in kind of a catch-22 there, where they either got to keep their creature removal in to be able to kill the Phoenix, but then it's bad against the rest of your deck, or they board it out and then they don't really have good ways to kill Rekindling Phoenix. So I've been really liking the Phoenix at just shoring up those bad matchups, and also taking advantage of the fact that the opponent's unlikely to have creature removal against you games 2 and 3. And then we've got 4 copies of Dovin's Veto. So this is basically just for the mirror match or any non-creature combo decks. Dovin's Veto is particularly good at looping with Siphoner and Ephemerate, at just ensuring you have a counter spell that can't be countered itself. But Veto is just probably the most important card in the mirror match, at just ensuring the opponent doesn't get to resolve stuff like Norset or Teferi. And like I said, looping it with Siphoner and Ephemerate is a really strong end game to make sure they don't win. And then finally, 3 copies of Settle the Wreckage. So typically this is a sweeper I'm not super high on. You know, it is obviously great against Phoenix, which is one of the main reasons that I'm running it here. But the main reason I'm excited to run it in this deck is because, like Divine Purge, it's another sweeper that's really good with Cyber Siphoner. Settle the Wreckage is obviously bad against decks that are running value creatures. You know, I wouldn't bring this in against Arcanist, because if they just have a reflection of Kiki Jiki, they're not going to attack with that, so they can just keep copying their stuff every turn. If you're up against a Sacrifice deck, they're going to have like Mayhem Devil and Gilded Goose that are just getting value and not attacking. So obviously Settle isn't for those decks, but against the just aggro decks that are trying to win by attacking, like your Phoenix or your Embercleave aggro decks, or even stuff like Humans, this is great. Not many people are expecting it. People don't respect it in general. But also, against those decks, even if they're creature decks that have haste, setting up Cyber Siphoner plus Ephemerate and looping Settle the Wreckage every turn is just going to be basically impossible for them to break through that loop, because we can just exile all their creatures every single turn. And, you know, similar to Divine Purge, it also doesn't hit Siphoner like something like a Wrath of God or Day of Judgment would do. So Settle the Wreckage is another card that really helps to make the Phoenix matchup better games 2 and 3, as well as just giving us a Wrath that we can just repeatedly loop with Siphoner every single turn as well, even against slightly bigger creatures that Divine Purge can't hit. So that's the deck. I've been really impressed with it. I've been having a ton of fun with it as well. If you've got any questions about the deck at all, drop me a comment below. Now onto the gameplay. I've got a few matches that I was playing with on the arena ladders so you guys can see the deck in action. So I hope you enjoy. Big up. Okay, sweet. Here we go. Okay, so we're going second here. And yeah, I think this is reasonable. It's a bit annoying that we're going second with this hand. We'd love to be on the play with Sensor, but... Okay, Helix is a nice draw here. So against Blood Crypt, hopefully it's not Arcanist, because that's a pretty bad matchup. Concealed Courtyard. Okay, sweet. So against the Greasefang deck here, which is definitely a better matchup than Arcanist, and we've also got a pretty good hand against them as well. We've got Sensor and Helix to take out Greasefang here, so... Iteration is a nice draw to just make sure we keep hitting land drops until Teferi. Okay, so they play Greasefang. Absolutely going to snap off the Sensor here. And then, thankfully, we've also got Helix to deal with Greasefang the following turn as well, which is nice. So we'll just pass here. Keeping up Helix is super important. If they miss a land drop, we could potentially Sensor another Greasefang. Okay, Fable. So that's problematic. I think I'm going to cycle the Sensor here just to see what else we hit. You know, if we hit a Helix, there's a chance that I might be interested in Helixing the 2-2 here, but Divine Purge is a pretty nice draw because we can use that to mop up the Engineer and the Reflection in a few turns as well. So we could play Iteration here, but I think that's way too risky because we need to hold up Helix in case they have Greasefang, and if we don't hit a red land off the Iteration, then we can't cast Helix anymore because we only have one land that can produce red here, so... I think we're just going to play a tap land and hold up the Helix here, and then we can probably Iteration next turn. Okay, they do have Greasefang, so I'm really glad I didn't go for the Iteration here. So we'll kill the Greasefang before they can get back the Parhelion. And then we'll take 3 here, and then depending on what else they play, if they don't play anything else here, I think I'm just going to slam Teferi. Okay, so they've got Croxer, which is a little bit annoying. We don't have Graveyard Hate game 1, but we do have counter spells and other ways to remove it, like Divine Purge and March. So I think I'm happy to well, I'm not happy, but out of these, I think Teferi is the best card to discard here. I think Iteration is more important than the second copy of Teferi. And yeah, I think I'm pretty happy just slamming Teferi here because they don't have a way to kill it on board. I doubt they're running some like burn spells in the Greasefang deck, so I think Teferi is likely to survive here, and then we can Divine Purge next turn because the Fable's about to flip into a Reflection, so we can Divine Purge taking out the token, the Engineer, and the Reflection here, and they could potentially bring back the Croxer here as well, so we could get a crazy value off the Divine Purge next turn if they do that. We'll see what they do. Okay, so they're looking at their graveyard, so they might be bringing back Croxer here. They are. Okay, sweet. So we're going to get a lot of value off this Divine Purge. I think we're happy to just discard the Triome here. We have quite a lot of ways to dig for lands off the Teferi Plus and the Iteration. So, and yeah, we want to keep all the other cards in hand. Siphon is super important. Purge is probably the most important card in our hand right now. And Iteration is nice as well at just digging for stuff. So I think I'll lead on Iteration here. We can guaranteed cast Divine Purge even if we brick on lands. But if we do hit a land... which we do, perfect. Since we do hit a land, we can play Divine Purge here, and we can hold up mana for Archmage's Charm next turn off the Teferi untap, which is huge. Okay, it looks like the opponent has something here, which is a bit worrying. Hopefully they're not running... Well, there's no way they're going to be able to stop Divine Purge. They might have... I don't know, maybe... Oh yeah, it's Deadly Dispute. Okay, so they sack the Croxer, which means that it's in the graveyard so they can escape it, but they only have one other card in the graveyard right now, so I'm not super worried about that right now. And we do have mana up for Archmage's Charm here, so I'm pretty confident about our spot here. We have 3 Archmage's Charms, we have Siphoner to start getting back Archmage's Charms as well. Okay, Hive is a little scary. We don't have a good answer for that at the moment, but I imagine they'll be focusing on casting other stuff first. So Fable, I'm very happy to counter here. They only have 2 mana available, so they can't cast like a Greasefang in addition to that or something. March is a great draw because that gives us answers to Hive already, which is brilliant. Another land is good, and I think I'm going to main phase the Siphon here just so we get value off the Teferi untap here. We can get back the Archmage's Charm again. So now we have 3 counter spells. Yeah, I'm pretty confident about this spot. Now we have March for Hive, which was their only thing we didn't really have an answer for. This spot looks pretty good to me. So they play another land here. Okay, so we'll just counter the Fable, I think. Okay, so we'll plus here.
You know what?
See what we hit. Oh wow, another Siphon is great because we can now... I think again I'm just going to flash in the Siphon a main phase to make use of the Teferi untap. Get back the Archmage's Charm, and now we have enough mana, even off the untap, that we have mana open for 2 Archmage's Charms during the opponent's turn. So yeah, I'm pretty confident about this game now. I think we've pretty much got this one locked up, hopefully. Yeah, sweet. Okay, so sideboarding here. Definitely want the Graveyard Hate. I think that's really important. And I think also Settle the Wreckage is pretty good here as well. What don't we want here? I think Censor probably loses quite a lot of its value when we're going second. And I think we'll probably just trim one-offs out of the rest of the cards. I could definitely see going down to 1, like trimming 1 to Fairy maybe. Because we're bringing in 4 settles, so the curve is going up quite a lot. And I can see trimming an Ephemerate and maybe an Iteration as well. Although I don't know, Iteration does seem pretty important. Maybe since we're bringing in Settle, we don't also need 4 Divine Purge. So yeah, I think I'll probably keep 4 Iteration, just trim one of the Divine Purges and run it back like that. But yeah, I think we're pretty well set up against this deck, especially post-sideboard. We have Graveyard Hate, we have Settle, we have Purge as well, as way to mop up if they do get the combo off, so... I think overall this should be a good matchup, but I think it really depends on how the opponent's deck's built. It depends on what the non-Greasefang side of their deck is. Like obviously we've seen Croxer and Fable, but there's quite a lot of other cards they could be running as well that could make this matchup more difficult. Just depends what configuration they've gone for, really. So what we keep on Mulligan is going to be quite a tricky decision here because we really ideally want to have early interaction. Lightning Helix is probably the most appealing card for the early game for us, but even like this hand without Helix, I think we're pretty incentivized to keep this. If we draw another white card, we can kill Greasefang on curve with March. Okay, Sentinel, that's kind of a problematic card. Yeah, like I said, if we draw another white card, we can kill the Greasefang before it gets it back, but thankfully they didn't have the turn 2 Engineer. And, you know, there are still a decent number of games, I think, where they're not going to have Greasefang on turn 3. Or they're not going to have the combo on turn 3 anyway. So we could obviously march the token here, but we'd have to give them a card off the Sentinel, so I don't think that's worth doing. I think we'll just have to play the Island and pass here. I want to keep up, since they're getting the discard and draw 2 off the Fable, I want to keep up Archmage's Charm, because they could very well discard a Parhelion and have Greasefang. So I want to have an answer to that. If they don't play Greasefang, I think I'm interested in marching the Sentinel. Okay, they do, so we definitely have to counter here. If they didn't have the Greasefang there, like I said, I'm pretty interested in marching the Sentinel now to stop them getting any extra cards off it. Okay, so they're attacking with both of those. Get a treasure token. Ha, and they have Croxer as well. That's a bit annoying. I mean, even though we want both marches here, because we want to kill the Sentinel and the Hive ideally, I don't think we can... I don't think we want to pitch any of the Siphoners, because we can use the Siphoners to get back whatever we discard. And additionally, if we hadn't drawn that iteration there, if we draw like an extra land instead, we could use the March on something, and then Siphoners would cost 2 mana, which would be nice. Okay, so Thoughtseize us. See what they take here. I think generally the opponent would want to take Siphoner, but since we have 3, they might not want to go for it. Okay, yeah, they take the March, which is a... You know, obviously we do want to have Iteration, but it's kind of annoying that we... You know, if we'd drawn a land instead, we could have cast Siphoner for 2 mana here. Okay, so they just attack with the 2/2. I think I'm fine just flashing the Siphoner and trading here. We also get back... I think, you know, March is appealing while they have Reflection and Sentinel, but I think I want Archmage's Charm, because right now, Hopefully we're going to be trading with this 2-2, and the only other thing they can really copy with Reflection is Sentinel, which isn't even that powerful. In general, I think getting rid of Reflection as soon as possible is really important, but with this current board state, I think I'm more worried about stuff they've got in hand. I think it's more important to be able to stop something like a Greasefang. I think at the moment we're not too worried about them copying Sentinel or Goblin Engineer with Reflection, so even though typically you'd want to kill Reflection as soon as possible, I don't think we're in that much of a rush to do it right now. I think we're just going to pass here, hold up the Archmage's Charm, because we can Archmage's Charm and pay for the tax here off Sentinel, which is nice. We also have the option to flash in the Siphoner. Iteration is actually kind of awkward with this hand because of Sentinel. Okay, so they get back another Sentinel here. I was just thinking about whether I wanted to steal the first Sentinel with Archmage's Charm, but we just lose to Greasefang off the top, or Greasefang out of their hand then, so I think we have to wait on that. So we'll see what the opponent does here. Okay, they shock in a land and they animate the Hive, interesting. So I think we're happy to just let them attack here. They know we have Siphon, so they're not going to attack with Sentinel or Reflection, and we can just flash in the Siphon in response to their attack and get the March that they're trying to exile into our hand here. So I think we can afford to take 3 there without it being too much of an issue. Okay, another Archmage's Charm is nice. We would like to start hitting lands so that we can maybe get to a point where we could cast Iteration. Then having double Sentinel does make this Iteration really awkward, so I kind of wish that had been a land. It would have made casting Siphoner for 2 mana really nice. But yeah, this is an interesting board state, because normally we'd be worried about Reflection, but I'm not that bothered about it. Okay, another Croxer, huh. So I think, like I said, this Iteration in hand is pretty awkward because of the Sentinels, so I'm pretty sure that's what I'm going to discard here. We want to keep March to be able to deal with Hive, or potentially a Sentinel maybe. And I think Archmage's Charm and Siphoner are important. Okay, so they copy the Goblin Engineer. They've already got a Parhelion in the grave, I think, so maybe they'll put another Sentinel in there so that they can get it back if they get another artifact in play. Yeah, okay, so they pitch another Sentinel to the graveyard. And I think we'll just discard the Iteration here. So it's interesting to note that that Hive is their second source of black. So if they do animate it, I think we're pretty heavily incentivized to exile it, because then they can no longer escape Croxer, which is pretty big. So they'll attack with the token just because it's going to go at the end of the turn, so we're happy to block here. There's no way they're going to be running like Spike Field Hazard or anything like that. And then Fable, yeah, we're not going to let them have that. We can counter this and pay for both the Sentinel taxes, so we'll definitely do that while we can. We don't want to let them get another Reflection, because then they can start copying Reflections and just getting a really wide board out of nowhere, which is pretty difficult to beat with our hand at the moment. So I think this is quite a tricky spot because of the Sentinels here. It's hard to know what to play, because we really, at this point in the game where they're essentially top decking, we really don't want to give them cards off the Sentinel if we can avoid it. Now they do have more than enough in graveyard to escape Croxer here, and while we would love to escape to exile Croxer permanently with something like March, I think we're pretty incentivized just to counter it, because we, you know, all 3 cards in our hand are pretty important. We don't want to lose any to the discard of Croxer really. So I think, similar to last time, we'll just Archmage's Charm and then pay the Sentinel tax here. And then I'm going to set a stop during my upkeep, just because there's a chance, I don't think we'll want to, but there's a chance we might want to March one of their cards and then cast Siphoner for 2 mana. Like I said, it's pretty unlikely, but I'm still going to set the stop just so I at least got some time to think about it. Yeah, I don't think it's worth it, because we'd have to pay, what, like, even if we exile one of the Sentinels, we'd have to pay 2 mana plus an extra 2 to stop attacks. So drew another land there. I'm going to play it because we keep one. I think it's really important to keep paying Sentinel tax here. Another Sentinel's pretty annoying. Okay, so, and they fire up the Hive. So we could March the Hive here, but I think I'm just going to let them attack first, because we would have to pay what, 3 mana for that, and then we won't get to flash in the Siphoner. So I'm going to flash in the Siphoner now. I'm surprised they attack with basically everything here. We get the Archmage's Charm back, which is really important for next turn to stop them playing something like a Greasefang or escaping Croxer. I'm definitely going to trade with the Reflection while we can now, and I'm going to get rid of one of these Sentinels, because the Sentinels are really taxing what we can do here. We are going down to 4, which is a pretty dangerous life total, but I feel like that was really important at being able to get Archmage's Charm into our hand. And then I think I'm going to go ahead and fire off... Actually, if we... The other big upside of doing that play was that we only give them 1 card off March of Otherworldly Light here, because we've killed one of the Sentinels. Now, we could have taken out both Sentinels and left them with the Reflection, but I feel like taking out Reflection is pretty important. We'll definitely take out the Hive here, because that takes them off Croxer mana. Helix is a great draw here, because 4 life is kind of low, but I feel like we kind of had to there, because if we just exile the Hive before it attacks, then we still take a decent amount of damage if they attack all, but we wouldn't have had Archmage's Charm in our hand for this turn, which I feel is really important for both Croxer and Greasefang if they drew it off the top. They did have a second black, which is a bit annoying. Okay, we have to counter the Sky Sovereign here. Thankfully we can counter it and still have mana up for Helix as well. But yeah, if we did just exile that land immediately, we'd have had to flash in Siphoner here to get the Archmage's Charm, and they would have drawn 2 off it. So even though we're at a pretty scary low life total, I feel like not having Archmage's Charm would have just drawn them an extra 2 cards off the Sentinel that we didn't have to otherwise. Okay, so they're gonna trade the Sentinel so they don't lose one. I'm gonna Helix the Sentinel in response, because I think the new Sentinel would have caused an extra tax to be paid there. Okay, iteration off the top is sick. We'll definitely pay the tax. We don't want to give them any extra cards here. So unfortunately we can't cast Teferi with the 4 mana, so we'll put Teferi in hand for next turn, and then we'll get another iteration here. Oh wow, that's great. So we can put Archmage's Charm in hand, and now we have mana available to counter whatever we need to this turn. So they can escape Croxer here. Okay, so they dispute the Engineer. They'll still be able to cast Croxer off the Treasure. That will provide them the second black here. Okay, they go for Blood Tithe Harvester. Interesting. So that will be able to kill the Siphoner next turn. We really want to be able to resolve Teferi here. So... And Blood Tithe Harvester can kill Siphoner with the Blood Token next turn. They get rid of the Blood Token. I think I'm interested in taking the Sentinel here, because it means we don't have to pay the tax, so we're more likely to be able to cast what we get off the Teferi next turn. But more importantly, it also means that we have creatures back to protect Teferi next turn, which is pretty huge. Now unfortunately it does mean that we'll have to discard whatever we draw off the Teferi to Croxer. Oh wow, okay, Purge is great. So, Purge can take out all of their stuff. I think I'm going to attack with Sentinel first here, because if we just Divine Purge, they'll have access to 2 Esper Sentinels out of the exile zone, whereas if we attack first and it goes to the graveyard, they'll only have 1 Esper Sentinel to cast off the exile. So we can't afford to pay the Sentinel tax here if we're going to cast Teferi as well, unfortunately, which is a bit rough. But we do get to get off Divine Purge here, and we get to resolve Teferi. Now the one thing I am worried about here is Croxer, because it can deal 3 damage off the exile, but thankfully now we've got Teferi in play, we can just tuck Croxer off the Teferi minus next turn. Okay, drawing Lantern is a bit annoying here, because we would have loved, if we'd had 1 extra mana, we could have shut off the Croxers. I'm going to set stops during the opponent's turn here, because I don't want to give away that I don't have anything. There's a chance they might play something that isn't Croxer first, just to see if Arena will give us priority. So I'm going to set a stop so it makes it look like we have some kind of interaction here. Although I can see them mousing over their graveyard, so I imagine they're just going to escape Croxer straight away. Which is a bit rough. We do lose the Lantern here, which would have been really useful to have last turn, but is what it is. And we do have a way to deal with the Teferi. If we draw like a March of Otherworldly Light, that would be ideal. But even if we don't, we can just use Teferi's minus to take out the Croxer. Okay, so they play a Sentinel, which I think is fine because we have Cyber Siphon to block. Drawing a land there isn't ideal, but we're going to attack the Croxer, and I don't think it's worth playing the land out here. We have enough lands in play already. I think it's just better to bluff that we have something in our hand at this point. So again, I'm going to set stops during the opponent's turn, just so Arena doesn't automatically give priority and just give away to the opponent that we don't have anything. See what the opponent does here. Okay, they've got Harvester. So we really need to draw something good off Teferi here. Another Harvester. Okay, so like Ephemerate would be great here. Divine Purge again would be great here. They obviously can't afford to attack with the Sentinel. Okay, another land isn't great. See what we draw here. Oh wow, okay, Settle's good. So then we can deal with all of their creatures, which is great. Which means we get to keep Teferi alive here, which is huge. So they got 4 cards in graveyard. Okay, let's see if they attack all here. I think they're pretty highly incentivized to attack all the Teferi. Yeah, we'll just settle here, I think. Get rid of the Blood Tithe Harvesters because they could have used, you know, if the Harvesters survive, they can also take out the Siphoner with the Harvester ability. Oh wait, actually, we're just dead here then, right? Because they can... cast Croxer to make us discard the Deserted Beach and then escape it to deal 6 damage in total. Which is really annoying. If this Deserted Beach had been a non-land, we would have survived here. So, yeah, and all of that was available with open information that we had. So we should have, to survive here, we should have let Teferi die and then discard Settle the Wreckage to Croxer. But, I mean, at that point, we're not winning anyway. I think we just have to hope that the opponent doesn't see this line. Yeah, damn. Okay, that was annoying. So, to stay alive there, we would have had to let Teferi die to those Blood Tithe Harvesters. Thinking about sideboarding here, Divine Purge did seem pretty important, especially against Croxer, and Teferi actually seemed very important as well. So I think I'll go up to 4 and trim a couple of iterations, because they were a bit awkward against Sentinel that game. But yeah, so that last game we should have let Teferi die, discard Settle to the Croxer to stay alive, but I mean at that point I think we're losing anyway, so again I think the best line there is to just hope the opponent missed that. I certainly didn't see it from the information that I had, so... But I guess I think I kind of forgot that they had Croxer third from the top from the Teferi. Okay, Thoughtseize a bit rough here. Take the Archmage's Charm, sure. Settle's not a bad one, but we're missing the second white mana. Thankfully we do have March to be able to take out Greasefang if they do have it. Triumph would be nice to cycle away if we keep drawing lands, but since we need double white for Settle, I think it's important to play out as a land here. Okay, they play Fable. So I think just to make use of our mana and to make sure the opponent doesn't run away with the game here, I think I'm just going to take out the 2/2 now, because them producing treasures and getting a big tempo advantage is problematic. Oh wow, okay, Hearse is great, because the opponent's going to get to discard here before the Greasefang turn. I mean, even if we didn't draw Hearse, we could have stopped the combo with Settle the Wreckage, but that was kind of a perfect time to draw it anyway. So Hearse, if it's left unchecked, it's just going to completely shut off the combo avenue of attack, which is pretty huge, as well as taking out Croxer. You know, I'm not very high on Croxer in Greasefang anymore because you just get so hosed by Graveyard Hate. Okay. So they do have Portable Hole as an answer for the Hearse, but at least we get to take out the Parhelion. And we'll also take out the Portable Hole here just to stop them getting that back with Engineer later in the game. So that's a bit unfortunate, but if we do draw another March of Otherworldly Light, we can just get rid of the Portable Hole and get our Unlicensed Hearse back online. Okay, they Thoughtseize away the Settle, so now we're basically just completely top decking. I think we're interested in playing the Storm-Carved Coast out here and just cycling away that Triome to hopefully hit some more gas. So Fable flips here. And we'll see what else they have. So they're going to animate the Hive, and I guess just start trying to tag stuff in our graveyard so that if we do draw Siphoner, we don't have much to work with. I'm going to cycle here just to try and hit like a Lightning Helix. So Lanterns, you know, it doesn't deal with any of the problems they've got on board, but it does stop the combo, which I think is pretty important. So we're going to play Lantern out here. Since they don't have Parhelion in grave, if it does get to a point where they are really pressuring us, then I'll probably have to cycle it away to try and find some more ways to deal with their stuff on board. Okay, they're just going with Hive. I mean, even though they're dealing 5 every turn, it could be a lot worse. Their clock could be a lot faster, so I'm not too worried about this. It probably means that they've got either interaction or more lands in hand if they're not committing anything else to the battlefield. Okay, Settle the Wreckage is sick. Just gotta hope they don't have another Thoughtseize, because since they're not doing much, they could very well just be holding on to Thoughtseize, because they know we have Ephemerate in hand, and that's not going to do anything until we hit Siphoner. Okay, so unfortunately they do have Thoughtseize, so I think we might have to cycle away this Lantern if they animate. Yeah, so they animate the Den. We'll cycle away the Lantern here to try and hit like a Helix or a March of Otherworldly Light. Okay, Teferi's not bad. But unfortunately Teferi is dead if they animate Den again. Oh wow, okay, Helix, that's great. So I think this is potentially good enough to get us back in the game then, because if they animate a land we can take it out with Helix and buffer our life total a little bit. If they don't, then we can just take out the Reflection, which is really big as well. Now, like, fortunately I don't have any good things to copy. They can't copy the man land because it would just produce another land. They can copy the 1/1, so I think we're going to wait until attacks before firing off the Helix here. The other great thing about having Helix is the opponent might... I mean, they might just not attack Teferi at all. They might only attack with exactly enough to take out the Teferi, which would be great because then it would survive with more loyalty as well. So we'll see how they attack here. We're almost certainly going to be taking out the Hive with this Helix though. Okay, honestly I'm kind of glad they went with Hive instead of Den there. I think Den producing an extra 1/1 is more problematic for us. So they take out the set with the Hive. We'll definitely take out the Hive with the Helix here. And then going into next turn we have Teferi plus and Iteration as well, so we're not looking bad here. We are at a kind of scary life total. Okay, March is really nice, because that can get Hearse back if we take out a Portable Hole. Oh wow, Helix is great as well. So we'll start off with Iteration. Siphon is a great one, and we'll definitely play an untapped land here, because we do have quite a lot of ways to utilise our mana. And then I think I'm happy to just Helix the Reflection here while it's tapped out, and they don't have an opportunity to make another token. Now that might be a little bit greedy, I don't know, because now we can only take out one of Portable Hole or Den of the Bugbear with our March, but we have Cyber Siphoner to get back the Helix, so... Okay, they've got Greasefang. No Parhelion, but they could crack the Blood token if they have Parhelion in hand. So I'm going to go into full control just to make sure we don't get miss the opportunity to get back the unlicensed Hearse here. Okay, so they do have the Parhelion in hand. I think the best way to counter that... I'd rather get unlicensed Hearse back than exiling the Greasefang here. So we'll exile the Portable Hole, get the Hearse back online, and just exile the Parhelion here. And now we can just shut off their graveyard for the rest of the game. Because Croxer, I imagine, is a card they'll keep in this matchup. It's one of the strongest matchups for Croxer, so... And then we've got Siphoner plus Ephemerate for next turn. Oh wow, Settle is sick as well. Okay, nice. I'm going to main phase the Siphoner here just to make use of the Teferi untap. I think we'll take the Helix here, just so we have a decent answer to... Den of the Bugbear and a bit of life gain if we need it. Settle the Wreckage was a great draw though, because that's a card that I think they're going to really struggle to beat. If we can start looping Siphon or Ephemerate plus Settle the Wreckage, I very much doubt they're going to be able to beat that. Okay, so we'll settle here. See if they have a Deadly Dispute or anything. No, they don't. Okay, let's see how many basics they're running. Oof, no basics. Okay, so Fable. So we could march the token, but I think There is also something to be said about waiting on Ephemerate there, because if they have removal for the Siphoner, that's pretty rough. But Arena basically gave away, they didn't have anything there because it skipped straight through. And we'll definitely start looping the Settle here. I really doubt they're going to be able to beat Settle plus Siphoner and Ephemerate. They would need to just break out the Ephemerate loop somehow. But again, since they're playing control, I don't think they're going to keep in much creature removal against us. So it's going to be quite hard for them to break up the loop here. So we'll just plus Teferi here. Okay, nice, another Teferi. I think we'll just Helix the token and march the Fable here, just because we don't want them to get the loot. We don't, and we'd have to deal with the reflection anyway. So I think it's better to take it out now. Now that might be a little bit greedy because we don't have a current answer in hand for Den of the Bugbear, but we have Ephemerate to loop with Siphoner to get another answer, and we have Settle the Wreckage as well. So. Okay, Sky Sovereign, so they can't really afford to hit Siphoner here because they know we can just blink it with Ephemerate. So yeah, they target the Teferi, but we can just blink Siphoner with Ephemerate and get back March to kill the Sky Sovereign. So yeah, nice. Okay, sweet, so we're going first here, and I mean, this is close. It might look like way too many lands here, but I'm gonna see how this one plays out, because if we're against an aggro, well, if we draw other spells, then it's fine. If we don't draw the spells and we're against an aggro deck, we can Helix their early creatures and then immediately Siphon for 2 mana to get back Helix, which is pretty good tempo. Okay, we're against Merfolk, and we didn't draw a land, so we do get to Helix one of their creatures, and then I'm going to set a stop during my upkeep so we can then flash in Siphoner to get it back again. Now, obviously, we need to draw some spells after that, but... And the other thing is with control, you know, as long as you have some early ways to interact, you want to keep hitting land drops. So even though we are massively flooded out and we would love to draw some non-lands here, having lands in control, you know, you're going to draw some gas eventually, so it's better to have hands with more lands than fewer in a control deck anyway. I mean, we'll see. If we draw another land here, it could be rough, but at least we've got Helix's turn 3 interaction. Spoke too soon. We do hit another land. I'm going to play out Sulphur Falls here. Maybe we should have played a tap land there instead, but at least we're representing Unholy Heat here. So the opponent does also know that we have Helix, so they might not run out their best creatures into it. I mean, Regery, I mean, we're definitely going to kill that. Another land, that's pretty rough. I'm going to main phase the Helix here just to play around Spell Pierce. You know, it's kind of a disaster considering we don't have anything else going on. If that gets countered. And I'm also going to set stops during the opponent's turn just so they don't know that we have nothing. Because if it's, you know, Arena will just skip straight through my turn if I don't set those stops, and it will just give away they don't have to play around anything. Okay, so they shock in the Breeding Pool. Kumano. That's an interesting one. I've not seen that card in ages. So I'd be happy to trade off the Trickster here, even though, you know, if we drew Ephemerate, that would be rough if we traded it off. Okay, Teferi is... That's a pretty sick top deck. We'll take that. Now, you know, even though they could have had Spell Pierce there, which would have been kind of disastrous, I think with just lands in hand, we have to start drawing for other stuff. Okay, another Teferi. That's not bad. We got a replacement one here, so... So yeah, even though they could have had Spell Pierce there, I think it's important to just play Teferi because we need to draw out of this. Oh wow, okay. Master of Pearl Trident is really rough here because we have the Ragran Triumph and the Hallowed Fountain are both islands, so that means that they can just cleanly kill Teferi here and we can't block with the Siphoner, which is a bit rough. So if we don't draw an answer to the Master of Pearl Trident, if we draw a Helix here, that would be great, but... So we did draw another Teferi. I think we're just going to have to tuck that Master of the Pearl Trident here. And then that will at least, if the opponent doesn't have something else, that will at least force them to attack both their creatures at Teferi to guarantee to kill it. And then that will basically just be soaking up damage towards us and buying us more time. Then we can resolve another Teferi and we can hopefully protect it with a Siphoner. Oh well, they have company, okay. So that, and they've got Master of the Pearl Trident in the top of their deck, so they can just cleanly kill Teferi here without even needing to you know, they can attack us and attack Teferi and guarantee take out the Teferi here. So interesting, they're not attacking with Kumanis. I guess they're trying to draw a card there, which I'm pretty happy about. You know, I just want to buy as much time as possible here. So with this Teferi, we could tuck Master of the Polar Trident, but I think they're so far ahead on board, we have to just start digging for Divine Purge here. That's the card that's going to save us. If we can hit Divine Purge. Okay. I mean, Helix is pretty good here because we can take out the Master of the Polar Trident, even through the ward on Svilen here. And since they have Master of the Polar Trident, I think they're pretty incentivized to only attack Teferi with a couple of creatures and attack us with the other one. And we can take out the Master of the Polar Trident, block one of the creatures to save Teferi, and we can potentially trade off with the Trickster here as well, because they'll lose the buff from the Master of the Polar Trident. So Helix was a pretty sick top deck there. Now obviously they could have Spell Pierce, but we couldn't really play around that. We need to get Teferi in play here. But the good thing is, you know, if Teferi does survive this turn, by us killing the Helix, then that means that they have to then attack Teferi again next turn, which is directing more damage away from us towards Teferi, which buys us more time to hopefully find something like a Divine Purge. So I'm going to fire off the Helix here before they draw a card off Svilen, because it would kind of be a disaster if they drew Spell Pierce off Svilen to stop the Helix here. So hopefully they don't have a Spell Pierce. We'll pay the ward tax, kill the Master of the Polar Trident, and now we can hopefully trade off our Siphoner with the Trickster. Teferi will live, which will then force them to attack Teferi again next turn. And this is all just buying us more time to hopefully find Divine Purge. Honestly, it would have been scarier if they were just attacking us every turn, because that buys us less time, but I think from their perspective, it definitely makes sense for them to want to attack Teferi here. So, okay, they don't commit anything else to the battlefield, which could mean they've got Collected Company here, which could be rough. Let's see what we draw here. Okay, another Siphon is not bad. What have we got? So we've only got Helixes in Graveyard, but that's still... We can potentially protect Teferi for another turn, which could be great. You know, like I said, the more damage that Teferi, or the more attacks that Teferi gets targeted for instead of us, is just buying us more time to get closer to Divine Purge. And this is definitely a deck, Merfolk, where if we can set up Divine Purge and loop it with Siphon and Ephemerate, that is very difficult for them to beat because they don't have any haste creatures. And since we have so much mana, I imagine the only counter spells they'll be running main deck is Spell Pierce. Okay, so they attack Teferi with everything here. So again, we can defend Teferi here, we can flash in the Siphoner, we can Helix the Silvergill Adept, and again I'm going to cast Helix before they draw the card off Svilen here, just in case they're running any hard counters. We could just block the Adept with Siphoner, but I think it's more important to keep Teferi alive here and just keep having Teferi soak up the attacks. And having Helix repeatedly is just buffing our life total to buy us more time. But I think Divine Purge is the main card here. I mean, we have got them down to 2 creatures on board, so... Oh wow, they have a company. So I guess they're trying to hit... Yeah, okay. They hit Master of the Polar Trident and Reejery. So that's problematic now. We really need to hit a sweeper, basically. With only 3 creatures on board, there is a chance that single target removal gets us there, but I don't think anymore. We could play Teferi to draw, but I think... We just want to try and hit Divine Purge here, so just in case we hit like an Archmage's Charm. Oh wow, perfect. Okay. And we can also play around Spell Pierce here. I was going to say, I'm cycling the Ralgren Triumph as opposed to playing Teferi, just in case we hit an Archmage's Charm or something. If we go Ralgren Triumph into Archmage's Charm, we can then draw 2 off the Charm to try and hit Divine Purge, but we just hit Purge. We can attack him with the Siphon as well, because they don't have any haste creatures, so that attack is pretty much free. And they can rebuild here. I guess well, the end game we're trying to achieve here is to just dig for Ephemerate here. I mean, finding another copy of Divine Purge would also be great, but if we can hit Ephemerate, I think game 1 they're not going to have any way to stop Siphoner with Ephemerate getting back Divine Purge every turn. Okay, so they've got Master of the Polar Trident. So annoyingly, this Reejery is allowing them to play more spells, even though their stuff is taxed off the Divine Purge. So they've got 4 creatures in play again. So again, same thing with the Rogan Triome. We're just trying to hit Ephemerate or Divine Purge here. So I'm just going to draw 2 rather than getting Teferi in play here, just because it's more mana efficient. We have more looks. Okay, Iteration. So we didn't hit Divine Purge, but we did hit Cyber Siphoner, which we can use to get back Divine Purge. Which does mean we have to survive 1 attack from the opponent here. So if they have 2 Lord effects, I think we're dead. But if they only have that 1 Master of the Pearl Trident, like if they hit another Lord effect off the top, I think we're dead here. But if they don't, I think we survive here. Those Lightning Helixes earlier were crucial to us having enough life total here, I think. So it's just going to come down to what they top deck off the top here. So there's 1 Master of the Pearl Trident. Okay, they go to attacks. That's huge. So I think we survive here. Okay, we survive at 3. And then we get to Divine Purge, which should stabilize us for another turn at least, which is huge. Okay, so we Purge again. And then I think I'm just going to resolve Teferi here. And then we can untap with Archmage's Charm as well. Now again, you know, we could counter something with Archmage's Charm, but they have so much stuff in exile off the Divine Purge. I think we're more interested in just drawing off the Archmage's Charm and trying to find either another Divine Purge or Ephemerate. Because we are drawing a lot of cards. We have Iteration to dig for stuff. Finding another Divine Purge or Ephemerate isn't that unlikely. So we could counter this Violin here, but again, I think we're just much better off at trying to dig for Purge or Ephemerate at this point. Okay, they play a Mistbinder and a Kumane's Speaker. So again, they have enough in play that I think we have to just try and dig for a sweeper here. So we'll lead by just drawing off the Archmage's Charm. Looks like they have something. Okay, they have Spell Pierce. I mean, that's not too bad. Oh, wow. And we hit the Ephemerate. Okay, perfect. I think we should just win here then. I very much doubt they'll have a main deck where, you know, they'll probably have counter spells like Spell Pierce, but they're unlikely to have any way that can stop this loop. So we can get back Divine Purge, and we can just sweep their board every single turn now. So we'll attack with the Siphoner. Iteration, yeah, sweet. Okay, so going into game 2, we definitely want to settle the wreckage. And I don't know if we really want anything else here. I think Rekindling Phoenix, this isn't a matchup for that, especially because they have Island Walk. We're not really going to be able to effectively block with it. Plus their creatures, they go so wide so quickly anyway. We're just interested in sweepers. Sweepers and cheap single target removal. But even then, you know, Sviolin makes it quite difficult to interact with their creatures with single target removal, so I'm very glad that we have access to 7 sweepers here, all of which we can loop with Siphoner. So I think Siphoner and Ephemerate with either Settle or Divine Purge is kind of our main game plan in this matchup. If we can set that up, I think we're pretty good. Now, unfortunately, I think even though we have a good game plan for the matchup, I think in general it is pretty tough because they are essentially a tempo deck, especially games 2 and 3. I'm sure they have access to additional counter spells, which is going to make our life pretty difficult. So it is going to be a tough matchup for sure because they put so much power into play so quickly. They have Island Walk off Master of the Pearl Trident, and they'll have Spell Pierce. They might have hard counters like Negate. So yeah, it's going to be tricky, but we do have good options against them. I think Divine Purge being 3 mana as opposed to 4 is really big in this matchup as well. So again, another very land heavy hand, but with Settle as a sweeper and March as early interaction, I think we can afford to keep it. You know, we're mainly relying on Settle here, and unfortunately, like, we would love to save this Triome to cycle, but we need double white for Settle, so I think we just have to play it out as a land here, unfortunately. So they play an Island and Mistbinder, sure. Another land really isn't what we want to see. So I'm going to play a land tapped here. We are definitely not going to exile the Settle to play a March here. We need to hold on to this Settle the Wreckage, so... Sviolin is pretty awkward here, because I was hoping to use March to exile the Mistbinder next turn, but now it has Ward 1, we can't really do that. Still going to play an untapped land here though, because I want to at least represent Archmage's Charm. You know, if we just play a tap land, then they don't have they only really have to play around Censor at that point. So we obviously could exile this violin with March by exiling Teferi here, but I feel like we're so light on stuff to do. Exiling non-lands at this point is really bad. So they have Relic to shut off Siphoner. We could exile the Relic here, but I don't think it's worth it. Now we do draw the Siphoner though, which is a little bit annoying. We would love to get back Settle with the Siphoner, so maybe... I mean, if we had a Siphoner in hand already, then I think playing March on Relic makes more sense there, but... yeah, I'm not really sure. I mean, we can kind of force them to crack the Relic anyway. Shape of Sanctuary. I mean, we're just interested in using Settle here. Wow, they play around Settle. I guess they're also playing around Shark Typhoon. So, I honestly didn't think that they wouldn't attack with both creatures here. If I'd have thought they would have attacked with just the Spire, then I definitely would have cast the March before the Shape of Sanctuary resolved, because obviously they get an extra card here. But I was just kind of convinced that they would just attack with both. Okay, so they had the negate. It's interesting to note that they're playing that. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm kind of happy that, well, happier that the March got negated rather than Settle the Wreckage. I would much rather Settle got... oh wow, that's a sick draw. Yeah, I'd much rather Settle got countered than... no, the other way around. I'd much rather March got countered than Settle. Oh wow, actually that was a really big misplay on my part. So we didn't get punished for it, but we should have absolutely played an untapped land before then, because they could have had Spell Pierce, and we could have played around that. I mean, thankfully we didn't get punished, but that probably would have just lost us the game if they had Spell Pierce. But yeah, Divine Purge there was huge, because it exiles the Relic, which allows us to play Siphoner, and obviously gets rid of the rest of their board. And now we can get back Divine Purge with the Siphoner. But yeah, we absolutely should have played a land before. So the Relic comes into play tapped, and they don't have a mana, so I'm tempted to just play Siphoner now, while that Relic is tapped, to get back Divine Purge for next turn. Now, we do get punished by exactly Master of the Pearl Trident here. If they don't have Master of the Pearl Trident, we can just block, survive, and then Divine Purge. But I feel like if we don't do it now, Siphoner's not going to do anything. We're kind of reliant on Settle the Wreckage to exile their two creatures, and then we don't really have anything to follow that up with. Oh, wow, okay. So, yeah, we do. That's a little bit annoying. They did have Master, so we can't block here, and they have exact lethal, but... I don't know. I still feel like I would have made the same play in that spot again, because if we don't play Siphoner there, then if, you know, say things played out as they did, we'd have had to Settle the Wreckage their two creatures, and then they would have had two Master of the Pearl Tridents in play, and we have like a Teferi and a Siphoner, and not really any good ways to stop what they're doing, whereas having Divine Purge in that slot, I don't know. I think we're not winning that game if we don't play Siphoner there. Obviously, we did get punished by them having Master of the Pearl Trident, but if they didn't, I think we're in a great spot. So I still think I would have made the same play in that spot going forward. So this hand, you know, obviously not as many lands, but we have Iteration to dig for extra lands, and we have Siphoner and Ephemerate with Settle, which is one of the main ways we're hoping to lock up the late game. So, okay, another land is perfect. We can Iteration for next turn if they don't play anything too powerful here. Yeah, okay, Mistbind is fine. So I'm just going to Iteration here. Get another Iteration in hand, that's great. And then we can just play this Hallowed Fountain taps. And now we have an Iteration in graveyard next turn so that we can flash in Siphoner, and there's a good target for it in the graveyard already, which is great. Okay, so just play out a Spylon. And they attack. So yeah, hopefully we can settle here, and then we can set up Siphoner plus Ephemerate. That would be sick. Okay, so attacking with both. I'll definitely settle before they draw a card, just in case the card that they draw is a counterspell. Okay, so they have negate. I think that's fine. It's a bit awkward because now we're going to have to Siphoner and settle. Oh, well, they have Relic. Okay. That's a little bit annoying. I mean, we do have March to get rid of the Relic, or we could also just flash in the Siphoner to force them to crack it. Okay, Triome. So I think we can deal with just a 2/2, so I think we're kind of interested in using March to take out the Spylen here. They could have Spell Pierce, so I think I'm going to do it in their upkeep. So I'm going to do it before they draw, just in case the card they draw for the turn is a counter spell. But I want to do it during their turn, so that if they do have to use counter magic, it limits the amount of mana they have to spend on other stuff during their turn. Because like I said, we can deal with the 2/2 fairly easily, you know, it's a 6-turn clock. So if we can take out the Spylen here, that's pretty big. Okay, so they force us to exile the Settle. That's a little bit annoying. Now we can't loop Settle with Siphoner, but I think getting rid of Spylen is more important than getting rid of Relic there. If we don't take out the Spylen, we're taking a lot of damage, so that's definitely the priority here. Ah, they have another one, but that's fine. We still, you know, that's 4 damage we're not taking because of that. Okay, another March is pretty good. Again, I think we're probably going to make the same play again here. Try and just exile that Spylen during the opponent's turn. See if they have a counter for it this time. Okay, they exile the other March, that's fine. Okay, sweet, so we exile that one. So we're just limiting their clock here, really. And again, you know, Relic is kind of annoying here, but we can force them to crack it with Siphoner, so it's not the end of the world. Okay, so they play a Regery. That is a little bit annoying. I think we just have to play Iteration and try and dig for more removal here. Oh wow, okay. So if we put Helix into hand, we can play Sulphur Falls and then play Divine Purge and still play around Spell Pierce here. And even if they have a hard counter for Divine Purge, we can still cast the Helix as well, which is huge. So that was a sick iteration. So we'll play the Sulphur Falls out here, and then we'll Divine Purge, which will also hit the Relic, which is huge. Okay, they crack the Relic. That is massive for us. Because that means they probably don't have a counter spell, and it means that we can now try and set up Siphoner with Divine Purge and Ephemerate. Yeah, okay, that was huge. So we just got to hope they don't have another Relic here. So they Silvergilt Adept. Shaper's Sanctuary, huh? So we could Helix the Adept here, but I mean, we're planning to go Siphoner plus Divine Purge anyway next turn, so yeah. So I assume they have to play something else out there to apply enough pressure to us. So we can now just go Siphoner, get back the Divine Purge. They're tapped out, so we can just freely Divine Purge. And while they're tapped out here, just so we don't get hit by Spell Pierce or Negate, I'm going to Ephemerate now just to get Divine Purge back again for next turn. And now they obviously are running hard counters post sideboard, so they do technically have ways to stop the loop. I'm going to set a stop during my upkeep, just in case they have a way to kill Siphoner, because the rebound comes up during my upkeep. If they kill Siphoner and I don't have a stop there, then you just won't. It will just skip straight to the Ephemerate trigger with no targets. Whereas if you set a stop, you can flash in the second Siphoner before the rebound resolves, so you still get the rebound on Ephemerate. And additionally, if you miss the rebound on Ephemerate, the Ephemerate stays in exile, so you can't get it back from the graveyard with later Siphoners. So if you're concerned that your Siphoner is going to get hit, it's always worth setting a stop during the upkeep if you've got another one in hand. So here they probably have Collected Company. I think that's the only reason why they wouldn't play any creatures. Thankfully we have both March and Helix, so at least we have answers for stuff they would hit. Okay, so they hit Master. Even though they get a draw off the Shaper Sanctuary, I think it's important to take out the Master of the Pearl Trident here, because otherwise they'll just be able to attack for lethal. So we take out the Master, and as long as we can survive this attack next turn, we can start looping the Divine Purge again. And we can also block with Siphoner here. We can block with Siphoner and then Ephemerate before the damage is dealt. So we just soak up extra damage and still get the Ephemerate off. And we also have the second Siphoner. So even if they kill Siphoner in response to Ephemerate somehow, we can just get Ephemerate back with the second Siphoner. So we'll block, blink the Siphoner, We can get back the Helix, and then just Divine Purge again next turn. Okay, so we take 3 here. And they just pass. Okay, so they don't have Company mana up, so I guess they just don't want to commit into another Divine Purge. We could have flashed in the Slifer there, but with nothing in the graveyard, I think it's a waste. I think we might as well wait till we have something else in the graveyard. Especially because it gives us a way to get back Ephemerate if our first Siphoner dies. So we can just Divine Purge again here. Okay, they have Negate, but we can Ephemerate Siphoner, get back the Divine Purge, and cast it again. And we still have 2 mana available to play around Spell Pierce as well. So even if they have Spell Pierce in addition, we can pay the 2 mana here, which is pretty huge. So we can Purge here. Yeah, sweet, we got that. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be really difficult for them to beat this loop. They need to negate the Ephemerate. Okay, nice. Yeah, we got there. Okay, sweet. So we're going first here. And we're against Kahira, so that's probably a mirror match, I imagine. I think this is a decent keep. You know, it's a bit annoying to have Divine Purge in the mirror match, but Censor and Teferi are both really strong cards here, so... Okay, so on Sacred Foundry, I mean, I assume that's probably a Jeskai mirror then, unless they're playing a different Kahira deck, but Kahira, from my experience, is pretty much always control. So we could cycle away Censor, but I feel like we have enough lands here, and Censor is really important at helping to win counter wars, and also, you know, stopping the opponent slamming in our set on this turn, for example. So Iteration, yeah, I'm very happy to censor that. You know, in general, I'd rather save my counter spells for the Planeswalkers, but censoring a Iteration there is perfectly good, and it also means that we have a card in graveyard to get back with Siphoner as well. You know, even though we'd much rather rebuy an Archmage's Charm, you know, getting back a Censor of Siphoner is fine. So Iteration again, you know, we want to save that like the hard counters like Archmage's Charm for their Planeswalkers. So okay, wow, they brick a land off the Iteration. They do shock in another land. So I'm going to play Siphoner here, and if they counter the Siphoner with something like a Censor or a Dry Disruption of their own, that'll be great, because then we can they'll be tapped out and we can go for Teferi next turn. If they don't, we get Censor into hand, and then I think going for Teferi is kind of risky next turn, because they could have, you know, some decks are running Maindeck Davin's Veto, they could very well have Dry Disruption. Oh, Helix, okay, I mean that's even better for us, because now they're tapped out so we can play Teferi. The scary play when you go for that is that the opponent can then also play a Teferi of their own and tuck yours, which we don't have a great answer to. You know, I would have had to think about that. But since we managed to get the Censor back off the Siphoner, we now have an answer for Teferi if they play it this turn. Okay, so they played Narset. I think that's fine, because we can just tuck that with Teferi and still have Archmage's Charm up. Okay, so they get another Narset. They did miss a land drop, so I'm going to cycle away Censor. That could be a bit greedy, because since they are missing land drops, we could potentially tag a Teferi with Censor, and they could go Narset and have Counterspell to back it up here, but I still feel like cycling the Sense there is fine, because we have 2 Archmage's Charms. They would need to have exactly land, Narset, and a Dry Disruption to punish that, so... Okay, sweet. So we get to counter the Narset. It is a bit rough for the opponent that they got stuck on 4 lands here, but we'll take it. We put Censor into hand here, get another Deserted Beach, and I think we're trying to use this Triomes to cycle here. We already have enough lands in play, I think. And yeah, I mean, we've got Teferi in play that's upticking. The opponent's stuck on 4 lands, so I'd be very surprised if we lost this one now. Okay, the Helix. I mean, again, I would rather save Archmage's Charm for the opponent's Planeswalkers, but I think protecting Teferi when we're slightly ahead is really important. Oh well, they have another Helix. I mean, this is really rough for the opponent, because if they'd hit their 5th land, they could have played around the sense there, and our Teferi would be dead, and the matchup would be a lot closer, but since they missed the land drop again, we just get to... Our Teferi gets to live. We have Siphon here, so I'm definitely going to main phase the Siphoner so we get more value off the Teferi untap here, and also we get the Archmage's Charm back when the opponent doesn't have mana out for counter spells, which is really important. You know, if they counter the Siphoner, we don't get the Archmage's Charm back, so... Okay, another Narset. We'll definitely snap off an Archmage's Charm there. And yeah, I mean, at this point, I think the game's pretty much locked up. The opponent would need... Like, we need to just draw lands for ages, and the opponent would need to top deck perfectly to get out of this now. I mean, having said that, we're kind of out of good interaction anyway now. You know, the opponent could have Teferi. We don't have a counter spell for it anymore, but... Even then, we have Siphoner that can attack it down immediately, so... So we'll just attack with the Siphoner here. We're not worried about Shark Typhoon or anything like that, because we have 2 Marches and a Helix to deal with any Shark tokens they make, so... Okay, rest in peace. So, I mean, that is a bit annoying with Siphoner. If we do draw Ephemerate, it's going to shut off the graveyard, but... We have 2 March of Otherworldly Lights to be able to deal with that, so... And I think I'm happy just snapping one off now, just because if we do draw any future Siphoners or Ephemerate, we would like to use the graveyard. We have the open mana, and we don't have any other good targets for it, so... I think that's fine. Okay, another land isn't great. Plus the Teferi to see what we draw here. Okay, Divine Purge. Again, that's not a great card. But I mean, I think we're just so far ahead now that it just doesn't matter. You know, the amount of mana that we have. If we ever draw something like an Expressive Iteration or more Archmage's Charms or even Ephemerate at this point, we're just going to run away with it. Oh wow, they miss lands again. This is rough for the opponent. Okay, so we hit Iteration, so we're going to pull even further ahead here. So we'll plus the Teferi. We'll Iteration here. Wow, that's great. So we get to put an Archmage's Charm into hand, and then we'll get rid of the Triome, and I'll just flash in the Siphoner here. I think we have so many lands available, and we've got the Teferi untapped, that I think we can just afford to flash in the Siphoner and get back the Iteration again. Okay, so Siphoner gets in for 2. Wanted to do that first just to see if they wanted to use like a Shark Typhoon or something like that. And we'll just get back the Iteration here, and now I think there's basically no doubt in my mind that we're going to win this one. Okay, they do have the Shark Typhoon, but we have so many answers for that now. I think I'm going to use the Helix rather than the March, just in case they make a bigger Shark later, or in case they have another permanent, like a Rest in Peace that we might want to get rid of. Then we'll untap. We still have Archmage's Charm. We have another Iteration for next turn. And the opponent, you know, we're nearly at ultimate with the Teferi, and we have 2 Siphoners on board, so... Okay. Yeah, I mean, that game just basically boiled down to the opponent missing land drops. So we definitely want Veto in here. Definitely don't want Divine Purge. And I think this is a matchup where we can bring in Rekindling Phoenix as well. Like, they might keep in March of Otherworldly Light, but them having to spend 5 mana to kill it will basically tap them out in every situation. And, you know, outside of March, they don't have any good ways to deal with it, really. They would need 2 Lightning Helixes or a Helix and a March to get rid of it, so... And I also think I'm going to cut Helix here because... While Helix can pick off Planeswalkers, you know, if they down-tick a Narset or Teferi, you can take it out with the Helix. But in general, I think March is probably the more useful card because we know they're playing Shark Typhoon. They might be playing Wandering Emperor as well, so I think it's really important to have ways to take out the tokens from those 2 as well. And we didn't see Hall of Storm Giants last game, but they could very well be running that, and March is basically the only good tool you have to take that out as well. So I think out of the 2, March is probably the most important one to have. And then, yeah, we're basically just replacing Helix with the Rekindling Phoenix, which I think is good. I think Phoenix should be good in this matchup. In general, I think the opponent's going to be boarding in stuff like Davin's Veto and Mystical Dispute, so the only real way they'll have to answer it is Archmage's Charm. And if we can resolve one, it's going to be very difficult for them to take out, because I very much doubt they're keeping in Wraths. Okay, so we have to mulligan this. Can't keep a one-lander. This is pretty decent, and I think we can probably afford to put a land back here. You know, we have our first 3 lands. Even if we don't draw our 4th land by turn 4, we can draw 2 with one of the Archmage's Charms. Okay, sweet. We've already got our 4th land here, which is great. And we have 2 red for the Rekindling Phoenix as well now, so... Okay, they shook in the Hallowed Fountain, which probably means they have Dovin's Veto or Jwari Disruption, or maybe Dispute as well. So I'm going to play the Glacial Fortress untapped here just to represent Censor, and I'm going to put stops during the opponent's turn just so it makes it look like I have something there. Okay, so I'm going to shock in the Steam Vents here. It's obviously important to have 3 mana untapped here for Archmage's Charm. And I think I'm going to snap off the Archmage's Charm this turn to draw 2 or to counter something. Okay, they play Iteration, I'll definitely counter that. Main reason for that is that I want to flash in Siphoner next turn and have a good target. If I didn't have the second Archmage's Charm, I definitely wouldn't do that. I think holding on to Archmage's Charm to be able to answer stuff like Narset and Teferi is really important, but since we have a backup Archmage's Charm, and we really want to be flashing in the Siphoner here, I think it's good. Otherwise, we'd just be flashing in Siphoner as just a flash 2/2, which isn't great. Whereas at least this way, we're threatening to get back Archmage's Charm, which is pretty huge. So we'll flash in the Siphoner here. Okay. I mean, that's pretty rough, but the opponent is now off Archmage's Charm mana, so I think we can pretty confidently resolve this situation here. Okay, it's a bit rough that we hit a Ralgrin Triome. I think we just have to play an untapped land here to make sure that we keep up Archmage's Charm. And we could have played Rekindling Phoenix, and I'm pretty confident it would resolve because they don't have access to Archmage's Charm because of that Sacred Foundry. But the problem then is, if they have a Teferi, they can just go Teferi, tuck the Rekindling Phoenix, and we're pretty... we don't have a really good way to come back from that with the current hand, so the opponent puts a 1/1 Shark into play, which I'm not too worried about. You know, we can basically ignore this for the foreseeable future, I think, because, what is it, it's a 17-turn clock. We're not worried about that at all, so we'll Iteration here. Definitely want Siphoner in hand, and I think we definitely want untapped lands here, because at least this way we can either flash in the Siphoner, or we can Archmage's Charm and play around Censor or Jwari Disruption. Okay, so the opponent has another Shark Typhoon, so I think that one is more problematic. I think we definitely have to deal with that 3/3. So I'm going to wait, I'm going to take a hit here because we want to use Archmage's Charm to counter Teferi or something like that if they have it. But if they don't play anything, I think I'm going to try and steal the 3/3 here, because then they're kind of forced to deal with it. We could play the Siphoner, but I think, you know, 4 power every turn. If we're taking hits from the 3/3 and the 1/1 every turn, that's going to add up pretty quickly. So I'm just going to try and take the 3/3. Okay, they do have a veto, but if we had taken it there, it would have been difficult for them to deal with, I think. So, I think we're just going to pass here and try and Siphoner an Archmage's Charm. Siphoner to get the Archmage's Charm anyway. And if the Siphoner does resolve, we could Ephemerate, but I think, you know, we'll have exactly 3 mana available, so I think I'm interested in trying to steal the 3/3 if this does resolve. And then if they do tap out for something else, we're much more likely to be able to resolve either Rekindling Phoenix or Ephemerate during our turn. So we'll try and steal the 3/3 here, see if they have anything. Oh wow, they marched their own token. I mean, that's really good to see, because we don't want them to use removal on the Siphoner in response to Ephemerate. It's really important that we try and bait out their removal. So I'm going to attack with the Siphoner first here, because if they tap out for a Shark Typhoon, we can just Ephemerate the Siphoner and that's fine. So we could just pass here and Ephemerate for the Archmage's Charm. We're 1 mana short, unfortunately, from going Rekindling Phoenix and having mana to go Ephemerate plus Archmage's Charm. So if we go for the Phoenix here, we unfortunately don't have Counterspell Magic, but I feel like it's just too risky. Well, it's not risky, but if we just pass and try and go Ephemerate Archmage's Charm, if they have removal for the Siphoner, that's just a complete turn wasted. We're only using 1 mana at that point, and we lose Siphoner and the Ephemerate. So I think Playing the Phoenix is really important here because it presents a threat that they have to deal with. If they have creature removal, they're much more likely to use it on the Phoenix, which then allows us to use Ephemerate on the Siphoner, which is what we're trying to end up with. We would much rather them use their removal on our Phoenix and then set up Siphoner plus Ephemerate, because if we can Ephemerate Siphoner and get back Archmage's Charm every turn, that's going to be really hard for them to beat. Anyways, they attack with both. I think I'm happy taking the 3 damage and just getting rid of the 1/1 here, and then we can potentially block the 3/3 next turn. If they just pass here, I'm not super confident using Ephemerate. I feel like they probably have removal here, so I think what I'm going to do is just pass and... So we could use March here to try and attack him with the Rekindling Phoenix and start applying our own clock, but the problem with that is if they have another Shark Typhoon, we're in trouble. Because if we attack with both, even if we exile the 3/3, if we attack with both and then they Shark Typhoon at the end of our turn, we're in trouble. So I think what I'm going to try and do here is March during their turn. So if they have a response, they have to use mana during their turn, so they have less mana available. And if they do stop this March, then I'm going to try and block with the Rekindling Phoenix. And then they're more likely to use their removal on the Rekindling Phoenix, which will then give us a window to start setting up the Ephemerate loop. Okay, so they do counter the March, which is actually pretty good for us, I think. Because now we can block with Rekindling Phoenix here. And I assume for them to even attack in the first place, they must have something to kill the token that Rekindling Phoenix makes here. Or them attacking just doesn't really make any sense. So we'll see. Looks like they're hovering over it with something. Okay, March. So that's great. So, like I said, I was pretty confident they had something. If we'd have used Ephemerate last time, they would have just used Siphoner. Now they've used that March. I'm pretty confident going for Ephemerate here. Okay, they have Fright. I mean, that's not too bad because now we can tap out for Teferi. Now they only have 1 mana available. We can get Teferi in play here. Now, the only downside of this is... Yeah, we didn't hit anything. So, if they have their own Teferi, that could be a little bit rough. I'm going to set stop during the opponent's turn so it doesn't give away we don't have anything. But even if they do have Teferi here, which they do, okay, that's a bit annoying. We can still follow up with Rekindling Phoenix, and they can't just tuck it. It's going to be very difficult for them to actually kill the Rekindling Phoenix, and then we're going to be drawing our Teferi again in 3 turns anyway, so... Okay, so Sensor, I think we'll lead on cycling that, just to see what the next card's going to be. Oh wow, Siphoner, okay, that's great. So I think, since they only have 2 mana available now, I'm just going to play Siphoner now, while they don't have access to counter magic. Get it into play so it's an additional creature that's pressuring Teferi. I think I'm going to get back Archmage's Charm here, probably. Or no, we'll get Ephemerate back to get Archmage's Charm, sorry. So we'll get Ephemerate, we'll set up the loop, we'll get Archmage's Charm back, and then we will... Even though if we play the Rekindling Phoenix here, we don't have access to Archmage's Charm, I think that's fine because for us to not attack Teferi, they have to kill both of our creatures, which would mean they'd need either 3 removal spells to take out Rekindling Phoenix and the token and the Siphoner, or they would need a sweeper plus a way to take out the token. Okay, so they do have... So Rest in Peace takes out the Rekindling Phoenix, but we still have the Siphoner to attack Teferi. And even if they have a removal spell for the Siphoner, we can still just play our Teferi and tuck theirs. So we could Ephemerate there, but obviously there's no point. Plus we want to be able to attack with the Siphoner this turn anyway. So even though Rest in Peace does shut off the Ephemerate loop, I don't even know if we'd have used the Ephemerate there because attacking with Siphoner is really important. Okay, they have a counter spell, but we have our Archmage's Charm that we got off the Siphoner, so now we can counter their Archmage's Charm. And now we're in a pretty good spot because the opponent is basically just top decking. It is a bit annoying they have a Rest in Peace in play, but... Oh wow, now we have an answer for the Rest in Peace, so yeah, I feel pretty confident about this spot now. We've got a Teferi and a Siphoner. Oh wow, okay. I mean, thankfully we have enough loyalty on the Teferi that we can just tuck that back into the deck straight away, which is pretty huge. Now, I was thinking about saving March for possibly another permanent, but now we've drawn a second Siphoner. I think we're pretty incentivized to just march the Rest in Peace at the end of the opponent's turn and then flash in the Siphoner to get back the March. Okay, the opponent bricking that turn was huge. So we'll just use March, we'll take out the Rest in Peace. And then we can Siphoner, get back the March. Now, there is something to be said about holding onto Siphoner to get back something more important, but I think it's really important to just get a fast clock here, apply pressure, so even if the opponent does draw their own Teferi to attack ours, we can just immediately pressure it and kill it back ourselves. So we can attack him with the Siphoners here. And now, hopefully, I mean, as long as the opponent doesn't have anything great this turn, which they don't, yeah, we would have had 4 loyalty to Tuck Niv next turn anyway, so nice.